Good morning, everybody. I'm Corliss Rose, Vice President of Programs for the IPCA. And what's happening in front of you right now is a kind of a rolling screen of work by our speaker today, Joseph Barbaccia. You are in for a real treat. Joseph is pulling out all the stops today. You are going to get a wonderful peek behind the curtain from this wonderful artist. Uh, there'll be some tips and tricks along the way, things that you can apply to your own voice and your own art. We have a wonderful audience today of close to 70 people, and I really think that we're starting 2025 off right with a bang. So, as Denise has said, we will be taking questions via chat and waiting for an appropriate pause to ask Joseph answers to these questions. And there will also be a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to present Joseph Barbaccia.
Thank you, Corliss, and thanks everybody for showing up today. Let's see if I can get this. There we go. I'm going to be concentrating today on two things. We'll talk about what it means to be an artist and using a polymer clay material. I've been using it for about 10 years now. And there's two basic reasons why I started with polymer clay. One is the fact that my wife used to do jewelry. She's an artist as well, and she used to do jewelry in polymer clay, moved on to different materials. And then once I retired from my job as an information designer in Virginia, we moved to a smaller place in Delaware, here in the Delaware beaches. And I needed a material that was very flexible, that I could create with in a smaller space, because I didn't have my large studio anymore, and that I was familiar with and was a little bit different, and I think exciting, more so than traditional materials that many artists in galleries, in commercial galleries might use, such as oils and acrylics and watercolors, et cetera, et cetera. So polymer clay was my choice. And that, like I said, was 10 years ago. And it's been more than just a choice for materials. It's been really a life-changing experience due to, particularly due to the International Polymer Clay Association, in that through the association, I got to learn more, and I should say, through the association, in my interactivity with all the artists here, I got to learn a lot more about the material than I ever would have on my own, or even in the area that I live. And also learn a lot more about being an artist through the people here at the association. So that was an unexpected plus in working with polymer clay that I hadn't expected before. Now that I'm older, and I plan on commissioning an artist to make a bust of me, but that's getting ahead of myself. Sorry, bad joke. Art, I think, is about being interested in things, not interesting. So by that I mean, what drives me as an artist, and I hope drives other people, is an interest in what artwork and art objects is and are, and not being interesting yourself with your work. It once, in working with polymer clay, it demands some sacrifice and risk while you're working in that. People often talk about the imposter syndrome, and how when you're working with something new, or when you're working in the art field, you don't feel like you deserve, your accolades, or you don't deserve people saying, your work is good, and you're not really an artist. But um, uh, but you are. Just being, just looking to create and to put yourself in a position where you don't know what you're doing is and it's an act of growing and an act of art. And I encourage everybody to keep kind of feeling like an imposter, because it puts you in the position to learn more, and to grow more in doing the things that you enjoy doing. So imposter syndrome, when you're feeling bad about your work, has a positive side too because of that. We're going to be talking about, I think I have 7 steps in how I do my artwork. Um, and which I call the process. And the first point of the process will be image choice. And I will go through these in detail after I give you the 7 basics. Image choice is kind of like tuning in to art in general. And I separate art into 3 different sections. I separate it into art with a capital A, which is more of a verb, or even not even a verb, but an idea. And then there's the artwork, which is the verb. Artwork means actually acting on your idea, acting on art. That's the artwork, and we'll be talking about that a lot too. And then the final end game of this whole art business is the art object. So when people point to something and say, that's not art, I agree with them. It's not art. It's an art object. It's the final result of both art and the artwork, and that's art object. So the first thing we're going to talk about image choice, and how I come to choose the images that I work through the process to come out with the art object. Then we'll talk about how I develop that idea, whether it's through photos, and I mostly work in photos, and I'll be talking about that too, sketches from life, that's what I also do, or I also work with AI. I work with artificial intelligence, and that's a lot of controversy, and we'll be going into my ideas about why I think that working with artificial intelligence is a valid thing to do. And again, with any of these things I say and start to say, or however it goes, please feel free to interrupt me. And I guess Denise will be breaking in. Is that right? Okay, thank you, Denise. Will be breaking in and asking me those questions. And I don't mind stopping my, I hesitate to say train of thought, because it sometimes gets derailed. So I don't mind stopping to make my thoughts a little more clear. So then we'll also talk after the development of Photoshop. Oh, and in when we talk about Photoshop, I'm not going to go into any detail because unless people have questions and they work in Photoshop, a lot of that is technical things dealing with Photoshop, and I can talk about that too. But we're here to talk about the process in Clay in particular. So then I'll talk about how I prep the work table, how I get that ready for the clay, and to prepare the images for the work table that I've developed and printed out from Photoshop. And we'll talk about color mixing, how I mix my colors. And that number 4, that's become, the more I work with polymer clay, this has been more and more important for me, the color mixing, because it's important because it's difficult for me to get the exact colors. The more I demand from myself to getting the colors, the exact colors I want, the more difficult this part becomes, and the more time consuming for me personally it takes to mix colors. I spend at least a day color mixing, if not more, the initial colors that I use for one of my works, one of my objects. And then we'll talk about shaping clay. I work with basically 3 types of 3 ways that I shape the clay to apply, to lay down, to get the images I want. And we'll go through some of those, how I do those, and laying the clay, how I do that, what goes into the process of actually laying it down, moving things around, checking for mistakes, blah, blah, blah. And we'll get into that too. And finally, baking the clay. This is probably a little bit quicker. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but I'll give you some ideas and feelings that I have when the clay bakes, because even though it's the quickest part of the whole process, I think it's the most nerve-wracking of the whole process. Okay, so let me first go, I hope not to bore you, but I'm going to go through a little bit of polymer clay history for people who are a little newer to polymer clay and might not know about the early history of the material. And first, polymer clay has been around since the 1930s. The idea was born in Germany, where a person named Fifi Rebinder, she was a doll maker, was having trouble finding her usual supplies. A resourceful person, she developed herself a plastic clay she called Fifi Mosaic, which she used for sculpting the doll heads for her dolls that she was creating. But it wasn't until 1964 that Rebinder sold the formula to Eberhard Faber. And most of you probably know Eberhard Faber is a manufacturer and developer of art supplies. The manufacturer then, Eberhard Faber, tweaked the formula into the Fimo brand of polymer clay. And they sold it to toy stores mainly in Europe, where it was viewed primarily as a toy for children or a medium for sculpting dolls and miniatures for use in dollhouses. Then, in the United States, polymer clay made its first appearance in the 1970s. The Schoop family, or Schopp family, immigrants from Germany, received Fimo as a Christmas present from a grandmother of theirs still living in Germany. The Schopp's clay creations soon caught the eye of friends and neighbors, and in 1975, the family began to import Fimo into the United States. American companies shortly followed suit, and meanwhile, people in the United States were also experimenting with imports of polymer clay. And there was a clay fish decoy sculptor named Gordon Swenerton, who used a vinyl dough that he obtained through his father, who was a chemist, who also knew about FEMA. And in the 1960s, Zenith Products Company in the United States created its own variety of polymer clay. The company developed Polyform, and Polyform was the original version of what is now known as Sculpey. Though the white Polyform Sculpey was sold as early as 1967, it didn't get its present-day brilliant line of colors until 1984. And until that time, artists had to add their own pigments to colorize the clay or to paint on top of it. By the 1990s, polymer clay's popularity was obvious, and other manufacturers took notice. Amoco developed friendly clay, departing from their existing line of natural clays. Primo clay, that's what I use. Primo clay came along in the mid-1990s when polymer clay artist Marie Segal, and I suggest you look up her work, Marie Segal, S-E-G-A-L, indicated to the makers of Sculpey that there was a demand for a higher quality of American-made clay. The newest variety of polymer clay, Cato polyclay, was developed in 2001 through the collaboration between artist Donna Cato and manufacturer Van Aken. Today, of course, there are many different brands of polymer clay from which to choose, as well as specialty clays like liquid, mica clays, glitter clays, glow-in-the-dark clays. And of course, polymer clay continues to gain popularity, and new techniques are still emerging. And we'll now go into the numbered sections, the step-by-step section that I delineated at the beginning of the talk. And the first is image choice. Right here, you see an image on the screen about it. This is a photo that I took with my phone. It was on a rainy afternoon in the fall, and I was out in front of a local gallery, the Rehoboth Beach Gallery. And I just happened to, coming out, I just happened to look down, and I saw all these beautiful colors and reflections and the texture of the stone. So I just took a couple of shots from it. And I thought, that has possibilities, but it wasn't quite there, and I'm not quite sure. So the first thing that I do about choosing any image, and we'll talk about this one in particular, was whether that image, whether with my talents, or maybe just pushing it a little bit, my talents or methods a little bit more, whether this image could actually transfer to something that I could use with polymer clay. I mean, it could just be a regular photograph, or, and not, I might like it, or I might make a good oil painting, but I'm not going to be adding my energy and time to it unless I can think through what I saw that attracted me. If I can think through that into polymer clay. Can I use polymer clay with this? And of course, the more we all work with polymer clay, the wider that possibility becomes. The more our talents and our knowledge and our experimentation happens, the more possibilities we have in creating the images that we need, maybe, can I say need? to create. But I might have chosen a different image. But the more I thought about this one, the more I said, yes, this has good bones. This has good bones. It's not there. There are plenty of things that I need to do with it. It wasn't ready for prime time. And one of the main things that I think when I look at images that attract me and that might be good for polymer clay is, what do I need to eliminate? I look at the image, I like it. At this point in time, I want to eliminate things. I want to reduce things down. So in this case, an image choice, I use this photograph. But in other situations, I might choose a sketch that I have, or if there's a if I'm in a drawing mood and I have something set up, or I'm at an art gallery that has models, one day a week, and I'll go in there and I'll sketch models, I may do that. So when I'm doing the drawing, it's something that I do post taking the photograph. I will think about whether this drawing I'm working on will fit into the polymer clay medium. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes, like I'm doing quite recently, I don't have any work in front of me, but in the future, if you're on the website or on the Facebook page of the IPCA Facebook page, you'll see some of the work that's coming up that I've been doing drawings with and testing ideas. So drawing helps you to think if that's the way you go, because you start thinking in terms of, I do polymer clay when I'm doing drawings, okay? Or I use AI, artificial intelligence. Now I work primarily with two different applications. One is called Midjourney. That's a little complicated for me, but I've been working at it. The other one's a little bit easier, and it's an Adobe product, and that's called Firefly. And again, like I said when I started the talk, there's a lot of controversy about AI putting artists out of work, or AI not being real art because it's made by a machine and it's all about code, and it doesn't have the feelings or emotions that the physical act of creating the image can give. And I quite agree to a lot of the exceptions that people make on why AI is not art, because AI by itself could never be art. What you need in all AI is human input. And even from the fact that humans created the application itself, or the algorithm itself. How I use it is, I did a piece once, it was a kind of like a plate, a large serving plate of seafood. And there was a large boiled lobster, bright orange in the middle of it with, I wish I had a picture of it right now, I apologize, but there was a lot of seafood around it. But in order for me to take a photograph of that image, I would have to spend all day cooking all that stuff and arranging it on a plate, even to draw it. And quite frankly, if you knew the price of seafood here at the beaches, it's expensive. So I couldn't do that. So what I thought I'd do would be, okay, let's see if I can describe it on one of these artificial intelligence programs. And that, everyone, that is a almost a craft in itself. How a person, an artist like myself, interacts with artificial intelligence is a craft by itself. To learn how best to describe, to type in and to describe the image that you want, is paramount in getting the image that you want. And then, just like I do with photographs, or just like I do with my drawings, once once the image is created, I still have work to do on it. It's not finished. AI can give me some imagination, help me with my bringing to reality that idea, but it can't do anything else for me, at least not to my satisfaction. And one of the reasons that's true is because I have something called aphantasia. Now, I don't know how many of you know what aphantasia is, but basically what it is I do not have the ability to see an image in my mind, which means that where most people can think of, they close their eyes are open, whatever the case may be, to look inward and imagine a green apple, say, and can see actually a green apple or anything, can see a beach scene, or a statue of a Greek god. I don't have that ability. It is completely black when I think of things. There's nothing there, nothing there. So because I have aphantasia, I can't imagine something in my mind and use that image, because there's no image there, to work on my artwork, or if anything in any using polymer clay, work on a sculpture or work on a piece of jewelry. I don't have that ability. So that's one of the reasons why I use AI, and I also use take photos to start myself out on an image. So we're gonna, because because of this mental problem that I have, these things help me overcome that problem. So let's go back to image development. I've chosen this image. Now we're going to develop that image in Photoshop. Traditionally, artists would use an underpainting in creating their image, say like in an oil painting, or they may use pencil working with pen and ink, or pencil working with acrylics, or whatever. They put their image down initially. And artists use that to get their values and shapes and the design, and where they want things to go, at least initially, in their piece. And of course, what I do, like I said, is I use a photograph. That's what I use initially for this particular piece, was a photograph. But those initial source images can only take you so far. And you can be faithful to them as much as you want and as often as you want. But for me, I don't want to sacrifice my voice or my enjoyment or my abilities with polymer clay to get a real detailed piece of work. I want to honor the material, as I put it, because I enjoy working with polymer clay. Like I said before, it's so you can use it for so many different things. It's so flexible that way. So the initial image only takes me so far. And one of the things that I do first is, and you'll see photographs, I have more, not photographs, but I have images later on to show you what I mean visually by this. I simplify the shapes. So with that photograph I initially took, I will use Photoshop to simplify the shapes. You could do it any other way if you don't use the computer for this. You could do, again, if you're drawing, and you have this drawing that you really like, but it's not quite for the way you work with polymer clay. First step I do with that is to simplify the shapes. And the other thing I do is I reduce the number of colors to form an initial palette. Now, in this talk, I've reduced the number of colors of the photo that you just saw to 16 colors, I think, 16 different colors. More recently, I've been doing 20 colors, but I don't hold myself to those colors necessarily, and I'll be talking more about how I change things, how I change colors or adapt as I work. And then after I'm finished doing this in Photoshop, I will print out the initial idea that I had from the photograph running through Photoshop, and then print out on my laser printer, and we'll go through what I do with it after the printout. But so the color prints are going to be, at least one of the prints will be the same size as the final art object. Okay, so going back to this, there's the initial photo. I like the idea, nice and colorful, good textures. I think I can do something with this in polymer clay. The first thing, of course, I want to do is crop this. I like these shoes, they're very comfortable, but they don't belong in the image. So what I did was I found a spot in the piece, in the photo, that I think would work really well because of how the seams between the tiles, the slate tiles, and the amount of color that's within that block, that square. I like the balance of that. And that's the cropping that I've chosen. So it ended up to be 16 by 16 inches, but there was something else I wanted to do. And what I ended up doing was rotating this 45 degrees because I thought it needed it had a certain rhythm to it, but I wanted to have it a counterbalanced rhythm. So what I did was I rotated. Well, the next image is the rotation and the simplification of the colors. So there was the cropping. This image, you'll see I rotated it, I simplified the colors, and this was the image that I finally worked with to get the art object that I wanted. And it has everything that I wanted in it. Now with this piece, I didn't have the larger oven as yet. So I had to do this in 2 sections. And I had the smaller toaster oven, and I used that to bake it. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I did this in 2 pieces. And the best place to separate this into 2 pieces in this particular image was along the seams of the slate tiles. So basically, I did this piece in 3 separate pieces, and then at the after firing, I glue them together on a board so it would remain stable. And then I added a little more clay to it to help hide some of the seams that were created in separating this into pieces. But we'll cover that more. So as we go. So with that piece, with that kind of part done, this is the palette that I ended up choosing. But I'm not a slave, a complete slave to the color palettes I choose. And as I'm working on a piece, I might make other colors with the clay. I create other colors with the clay that I think work better with pieces I go along. And I will sometimes mix other colors from these basic colors. But you also, and I'm sure you're mostly aware of it if you've ever done any baking, these colors look differently on the screen than they do when printed out on laser, and then they're going to look differently after you bake them. So all that experience that you had of all the things that you baked previously have to come into play when you're choosing the color palette from your work. And of course, just like anything else, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So I have my color palette, I have my printouts. Now's the work table prep.
Joseph, can I stop you
Yes.
for a second? We have a
Yes.
couple questions about the color mixing. You might have answered one. Kathy's asking if you could share how you simplify the colors, and then she asked if you just use the CYM in black and white, or do you go about it a different way?
Okay. So if we go back, we're going to have to go back into Photoshop to simplify the colors. There is a command in Photoshop that will change either a CMYK or an RGB image into what's called an index color image. And then when you change it, it's up in mode. The command is in mode. And when you change it to an index color image, you can choose how many colors that image will have. And then Photoshop will use its magic, its algorithms to reduce the colors, all the variations of colors in that to the 20 colors, 16 colors, whatever amount of colors that you type in. So I take my CMYK, take my RGB, go up to mode, change it to index color. A pop-up menu will come up. It'll ask me, how many colors do you want to change it to? And I think you could change it from 2. You could make it black and white if you want. I usually do 20 colors, but you could type in just about any number in there and it will change it. So did I answer that question on how I change them?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? That other question, Denise?
The other question was if you then only use the CMY, do you when you color mix, are you using like CYM in black and white, or do you, when you color mix, do you just put things together to come up with that color? Like how
Oh,
do you...
gotcha. Okay, I understand. I wasn't very clear. The color mixing that I do, or that I was referring to, is with the clay itself. So after I've reduced the amount of colors and get these colors in the image, Then I will go, and we'll cover that a little bit later, a couple of steps too. Then I will go and mix the clay to match these colors. So
Okay.
the computer will do this for me, will do these 16 colors for me. Then I'll take the printout, and of course, I'll keep this up on the screen too to help me mix the colors with the clay.
Right, and you're going to talk about mixing colors in a bit, right?
Right, exactly.
Great.
So I
Thank
don't mix the colors on the computer. That is what Photoshop will do for me. We'll reduce the colors to these colors. And then once I start working with the clay, then I'll mix the colors, you know, with my mixer, my Oscar mixer, or or I'll use my hands, or the pasta maker, but we'll cover that too.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Sure, of course. Okay, so work table prep. Clear and clean it. I, rub it down with alcohol, use the paint thinner for stubborn spots. Make sure I have ventilation when I use that paint thinner, that's for sure. The alcohol, it's fine. So I make sure everything is clear and clean, and I also make sure that I have a lot of good, even, I forget what they call it, a full spectrum lighting when I'm working on the table, because again, the colors have become a little more important to me than they were before. I take the printout, the full-size printout, and I take it and tape it to the back of a real thick piece of glass. I have different sizes that I use, and we'll cover that a little bit too. Different sizes for the different size ovens that I have. So I'll tape that, and I also have a printout. You'll see I have the printout for the color palette. I use that right next to me, have that always right next to me. And as I mix the colors, and we'll talk about that in a second, but as I mix the colors, I'll put an X next to each separate color bar. So I know that I've mixed that color. And I'll set them up, I'll set them up in I have a little shelf here next to where I work, and I'll set the colors, the actual clay up next to in the same position that I have on the printout of the color table. So I don't get, so some of those grays are really close to each other, and I don't want to get them mixed up on the actual art object. So we put the color printout there next to it. I refer to that all the time. I also have a couple of reference printouts that I have, and you can see two of them there. And why I have the reference printouts is because as I start to lay the clay on the glass, and I'm covering up the printout that's on the back of the glass, I sometimes have to go back. And when I go back to fix up a corner, I can't see what's underneath anymore. So I'll need that other reference printout to say, oh, okay, it's that cool gray that goes into that spot that I just took out. So that's what I use the reference printouts for. And again, I also have my computer on, and the computer screen will help too, because I'll have this up on the computer screen. So now with the color mixing, there's two things here. That ballpoint hammer that's seen better days, the ball peen hammer that's seen better days. That was my father's, and that's why I use it still, not because it's a good ball peen hammer. And then the Oscar, the Sunbeam Oscar. This thing, I can't kill this thing. I've tried to kill it. No, not really, but I thought I could kill it. This thing works forever. I don't believe they make them anymore, at least not in the States. You can buy them online, like in eBay. I don't know how you know, what condition they're in. You never knew when you buy things on eBay or anything like that. But this one was my mother-in-law's, but she didn't use it for clay. But I got it as a hand down, and I've been using it for over 10 years, and I'm sure she used it 10 years before that for food. And this thing's a workhorse. It just goes and goes. I have a backup too, but I haven't had to use that backup. Anyway, so those two things. Of course, warmer temperatures in the studio are better for mixing, and I have a little space heater fan, and I try to keep the temperatures right. A little warmer when I'm mixing clay, but that will change, and I'll talk about changing the temperature when you do other things. So the first thing I'll do when mixing small amounts is I'll take a ball peen hammer to the clays that I'm mixing, and you know, put a little heat into them with that, mix them up a little bit, and then usually, instead of, if it's a small amount, I won't put it into the mixer. I'll put it into the pasta machine and mix it through the flattening rollers of the pasta machine. And I'll just keep putting it through, putting it through, putting it through. And I'm fortunate enough to have an electric motor on that pasta machine and a pedal controller. So it makes my life a little bit easier having those two things, because as I think I said earlier, I spend at least a day mixing colors and getting my colors right. And hopefully in the future, I'll be smarter and be able to take less time getting the colors the way I want to. But right now, I'm not at that point. So I spend at least a day on the initial colors. And then as I'm working, I may add a color or two to help with the image itself. So I match the color palette as closely as possible with the clay. But keeping in mind, I think, like I said earlier, that the clay is going to darken slightly and lose some of the saturation when baked. So in order to kind of compensate that, obviously, I'll have a little bit brighter colors than the palette will show, and particularly with reds. And I used to use the neon clays, but I'm having a difficult time finding them lately. I still have a little bit left. And the neon helps give a boost to the colors. I just use a little bit, but it helps give a boost to the colors so that after they're baked and lose that saturation, they're more closely related to the color palette that was chosen.
We have a question about your grays. If you have, when you have so many grays, do you number your grays to keep your
No,
swatches?
no, but that's a good idea to do that. I wouldn't say no to that. How it's more Photoshop work, and I didn't want to get rid of into it so much because not everybody's using Photoshop. But what I'll do is Photoshop also has the ability to select a color across the image. So any part of the image with that particular color, I can select, and then I'll delete that color off the image and then paste it into another layer so that I know that that layer, wherever the colors are in that layer, will correspond to where those colors are on my printout under the glass. So that I can say, okay, that's color number, that's the first color in my color palette.
Mhm.
And then I can click on that on the computer. It highlights the colors on the image in Photoshop, and then I can go back and forth and say, oh, that gray is only in this section. And this warmer gray that I've selected, deleted, and placed back in on a different level is in a different section. So that's how I keep track of colors that are really close to each other, is that I'll separate in Photoshop, I'll separate them on different levels. and then hide the other levels, and it will tell me where that particular color goes, that particular gray.
Thank you.
It can get complicated. And that's why I didn't want to go into it too much, but that's what I do. I utilize the power of Photoshop to remember for me where these grays go.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
And also, I want to say that if anybody has any questions or want to contact me afterwards, I'd be happy, to email you, or I'm on Facebook, blah, 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 any of that stuff. Contact me, and I'll be glad to go into detail with any of these things with anybody. I'm not shy when it comes to that.
Thank you so much.
So also, when I'm working with the pasta machine and I'm using the shaper roller, like to make spaghetti shapes, sometimes the clay is too soft, and it gets, maybe other people have gotten into this problem where it gets too soft and it sticks into the rollers, and it's just hell getting it out of there between mixing of the clays. So one of the things that I do, and we'll get into that a little bit more, is to leach the clay to take some of the chemicals out of it, I guess. Okay, shaping the clay. There's three ways that I shape clay. One is to flatten it out on the pasta machine, and then I will cut the shapes out with something similar to an X-Acto knife, a clay tool that I have with a sharp edge, and then place those pieces that I cut out onto the glass. The image that I showed you earlier of the work of the slate tiles and the leaves, I use that method of cutting out shapes and then placing those shapes in. I also use another method that I will flatten out the clay after I mix the colors, flatten them out, and I'll just pinch. I'll take a pinch of that clay with my fingers and place it down onto the glass. So I call it obviously pinch and place, pinch, place, pinch, place, and I have all the colors laid out almost like it was a color, a painter's, an oil painter's color palette. I have that, all those colors laid out, and I'll pinch and place and pinch and place. And by doing that, it gives some of my work an impressionistic quality to it, which I kind of like. And then the third way that I'll shape the clay is by using the spaghetti rollers and having strips, little worms, little strips of clay, little shoelaces of clay, and use that for texture and to create the texture and shape. Those are the three basics. Sometimes I combine them. So about cutting the initial shapes, it's all about estimating angles and lengths, and sometimes they get it wrong. So I always say cut your best and fill in the rest. You got to get the best, you got to do the best. And just like any other hand-eye coordination, it comes to practice, practice, practice. Again, the temperature of the studio is important, especially when you're running the clay through the pasta maker, through the spaghetti roller. You don't want it to stick. One of the things that I use to keep it from sticking to that roller is I have like an ice pack, and I bring that into the studio, I cover it with a piece of cloth and clean cloth, and then and I use a clean cloth because I don't want the clay to get wet. And I'll put the clay, the rolled clay, before I put it into the spaghetti roller. I put the flattened rolled clay on top of the ice, so it's not so soft, and it can get a little stiffer enough so that it'll go through the spaghetti roller and not stick to the roller, so you don't have to clean it each and every time. Now, you do have to be careful about making it too cold. Excuse me. If you make it too cold, if you keep it too long on the ice, it breaks up going through the spaghetti roller. And then you have these little half-inch pieces of clay. And if you want that, it's good. But if you're looking to keep the clay like in long spaghetti-like pieces, then it's not going to work. So it's just a matter, again, timing on how stiff you want the clay to be and not too stiff to go through the roller without having to deal with cleaning the roller each time you want a new color to go through it. And personally, I'd rather create and lay my clay down than clean rollers. So I talked about the 3 shaping methods. The pasta machine, flattened, cut to shape, then flattened, pinch and pare, and then also the going through the pasta rollers for whatever shape, linguine, spaghetti, and there's another one, angel hair. I also use that. But I've also done images where I combined, 3 of these basic shapes or 2 of these basic shapes. Okay. So next is laying clay. Laying clay is real important to me. That's where the artistic side really takes over. Everything, most everything before that, except for maybe the initial ideas. But the going through Photoshop, preparing that, and mixing the clay and shaping the clay, all that has a lot to do with technical expertise. But laying the clay, I think that's where your artistic side really comes through. That's getting really touchy-feely with the art object. That's where your art, that's part of your artworking. But it's really the touchy-feely part that I enjoy most, the tactile part. And I also say that my DNA is in every piece, because sooner or later a hair is going to get in there and I'm going to miss. So my DNA is in every piece. Any of those textures that we talked about in the last slide in shaping clay will help to define the surface and texture and form. But what also helps to determine, I'm ahead of myself. What also helps to determine that is how you lay the clay down. You have to make sure that in the work that I do, because after the clay is baked and it comes off the glass, I want to minimize the amount of holes that are in the clay, that you can see through the clay, because my artwork is usually no more than a 1/4 inch thick, mostly thinner than that. And if it has holes, and we'll go over this at the end again, I lay a surface treatment on top of the clay after it's baked. And if that surface treatment has holes in it, it's gonna make a mess. So what I try to do when I'm laying clay is make sure that one piece really butts hard up against another piece, that they're nice and tight in between. And that way, taking the piece of clay, piece of baked clay off of the glass, it comes off in one piece. It doesn't break up. So we also talked about hair getting in shaping clay and in laying the clay. I just work with my sleeves pulled up because you're always going to get minute fibers, and most of the time they're not going to make that much a difference particularly with darker colors, but with whites and lighter colors, even the work that I do, which is highly textured, you're going to see that right away. And it takes more time to get those fibers out than it's worth it. So just pull up your sleeves and get keep as much fiber as you can out of the clay. Let's see. What else I do with laying down the clay, even though I have separate areas that are designated to separate colors, to help promote unity throughout the piece, I'll throw in a little blue into where the green's supposed to go. If there's that same blue that's in the rest of the image, just to promote the idea of unity and maybe pull the eye if it needs to be pulled into a darker section. You put a little bit, just a small tab of bright color in there. And excuse me, I'm not used to talking this much. Just so that it can brighten up or draw the eye to a darker area if that darker area is going to be important to your whole design. So I'll do that. My work, some of the bigger pieces will take a month to do. So I make sure that, again, the idea of dust and minute fibers, when I'm finished for the day, I'll cover it with wax paper, just to keep dust off. I don't often clean the filters in my heating ducts, so I have to keep the dust off someplace. And that's what I use, the wax paper. Because the wax paper can easily, it doesn't affect the clay, doesn't really stick to it hard. I mean, you could push it, but it doesn't stick to it hard. And it's easy to take on and off. Okay, baking the clay. That's my oven. It's a regular size electric oven, and then there's the larger toaster oven that I had originally that still works and I'll use for smaller pieces. The larger oven will take a 17 by 22 size piece of glass. The toaster oven is 14 by 16. And I've had larger pieces, I'll do one of two things. Like I explained before, I'll piece those together post baking and glue them onto a board and assemble them that way. Or I've also done pieces where I purposely made a series of almost like tiles, although in the particular case that I'm thinking of, it was circular pieces of clay, about 5 inches in diameter, and used several of those to form the whole piece. So that, or I will bake tiles and then assemble the image after I bake instead of before I bake, assemble the image afterwards like a mosaic. I've done a couple of those too. So then I can make larger images that may be, 3 feet by 2.5 feet, I think they were, 2 of them. And I just had to bake in the smaller oven the separate tiles, 1-inch square tiles that I made. So that's another possibility of making larger pieces when you have a limited amount of space to bake. So I just follow the directions on the clay packet as far as temperature goes. The rule of thumb is, of course, the 275 for 30 minutes. If you might be able to make out in the larger black oven, there are 2 oven thermometers on the top there, on the top grate, and I'll make sure they're in there. I'll test it, the oven, every time I preheat it to make sure it's at the right temperature. And then every year I'll get new thermometers. So, I use 2 oven thermometers. The other thing I do is if I'm working with 3D, and I haven't done that in the past year because I'm preparing for 3 shows this spring and summer, I'll cover the piece with aluminum foil, so it's not open to direct heat from the elements in the electric oven. What I do normally with flat pieces is just underneath the thermometers there, I bought a sheet of flat aluminum, a thick gauge aluminum, to put on the top grate, so it's in between the elements at the top of the oven and the piece that's on the second grate, and that keeps the direct heat off of the art object that I'm making. So that's all important. Otherwise, and it's happened to me once, and this is, again, oh, I remember I told you, this is the scariest part for me, because it happened to me once. Well, it's happened to me twice. And once I worked a month on a piece, and I'm sure a lot of people have gone through this, and you put it in the oven and something happens and it burns, and there's no going back after it burns. And take a deep breath, you don't like it, but you take a deep breath and you start over again. That's all there is to it. And so I'm really careful now. What I'll do is, not only will there be a shut off timer on the oven, but I'll have an alarm on my cell phone to check it after 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then when the alarm goes off, because I'm scared. I can't afford to waste the month anymore. I don't have many months left. So here's just some general thoughts. There's the final piece, by the way. It does have a couple of coats of Minwax polyacrylic varnish. That's what I use, tried and tested. This in particular, I use the gloss finish on because it was about a wet day, so the gloss finish, represented with what I wanted in the image. But most of the time I'll use the matte finish. And what the matte also helps to do is to also unify the image. It brings everything together, because it does fill in the little, a couple of coats will fill in the little cracks or the little dips that you might have in the piece, and it really helps bring the whole thing to be one piece, rather than separate pieces of clay. So I have a rule for myself when I'm working, and that is work and continue working and keeping my butt in the chair. You got to do that, and I have a difficult time doing that. I don't know whether I have some problem with paying attention. I always blame it on the fact that when I was younger, when I was a kid, when I watched TV, commercials were like every 15 minutes. So we get up and grab a snack or do something. So my attention span is about 15 minutes long now. So I have to concentrate really on keeping my butt in the chair and working. And that ends up making, I think, a better piece in the long run, is that just work. The 3 Ps as far as art goes, it's passion and patience and practice. And again, I don't have a bullet point for this, but I really believe that art is idea, artwork is a verb, and art object is a noun. And those are the three art words that, when they come together, make me feel good. You know, they do. Whether I sell them, whether they're appreciated, I know that I put my best efforts into these pieces, and that's something that is important as well, about seeing mistakes. I was thinking about this the other day, and taking the time to not only see your mistakes, because I think when you're working on something and you have an idea, you have an end game in mind, I notice right away when something is wrong, when I didn't do something right to attain that final image. And it's an unconscious thing. What the difficulty is, I think, is admitting to yourself, realizing that, yeah, that was a mistake, and then making the effort that goes into the passion part of this and the practice, making the effort to correct those mistakes. Or if you deem that the piece is beyond correcting those mistakes, lay it aside. I'm sure most of us have a lot of ideas, or some ideas, about what we're going to do next and what we can do next. You don't have to destroy the piece necessarily, that you made enough mistakes on that it's going to be difficult to pull back, especially after you bake something. Then, of course, the problems of bringing it back to where you wanted it are emphasized or worse. So just go on to the next thing. Just keep working. Keep your butt in your chair and enjoy. Okay, and I guess that's the end of it for me. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we have some questions that I kind of passed over because we had gone past where we were. So we wanted to know, Paulette wanted to know what kind of pasta cutter you use when you're using the like the spaghetti or the linguine.
Oh, okay. It is. Let me get it. It's a Marcato. Did you get that? A Marcato?
Avocado, okay.
That's the one I use. And again, it is. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay. It is I do have a motor on it, and what I'll also use when I'm just cutting pieces is this. You can see that. So that's what I use when I'm cutting pieces separately. So it's just a straight blade. It's not sharp. I don't need it sharp. Well, everybody knows you don't need it that sharp to cut polymer clay.
Right.
So it's a Marcato machine, and I use also these type of rollers. You see these, everybody knows those. Oh, geez, I didn't clean that one. What is the problem? This is the angel hair. This is the linguine and the spaghetti.
And they just come out, so you don't need to cut them.
Right. It's almost like having an extruder, except which I do have an extruder, but that would take and I've worked with the extruder when I've done some sculpture, but it takes too long to use the small extruder to get as much clay as I need to cover, you know, a large expanse of space. So
Right.
these work they work okay. But the extruder I have is a Lucy clay extruder that I have a small, see, where is it? A small drill. It's a small hand drill. It's called an enter twist. And you can attach those with, you can attach those, just a real small handheld drill. That's inexpensive, rechargeable, and you put the attachment on the end and it goes right onto the extruder that I have.
Great. All right, thank you. And Lorene asked if you keep recipes of your colors, or is there, because they're so unique to each picture, do you not?
No, I do not keep recipes. That is, what can I say? I envy people who are that organized. I really do, but I am not. I do it all extemporaneously and on the fly. Now, if you can see behind me, I have a lot of plastic containers with past colors that I keep, but it's always by eye. And that's one of the reasons why I keep the same lighting, and it's the full spectrum lighting, because that helps a lot. And since I think that if I did repeat work, like making jewelry or things like that I would sell regularly, I think then it would be very important for me or anyone to put down the formulas for their colors so they could, you know, replicate the multitude of pieces that they make for sale. But since mine are kind of one of a kind, or definitely, excuse me, one of a kind, I don't do that. Plus, again, I'm unorganized.
Well, I was thinking because you do spend an hour, I mean, a full day on the colors, if you just took a color swatch and baked it, you could recreate it and not spend an hour. I mean, because even though you have your picking process, the colors that you would be reusing could take less time, and it'd be more time on your art, the art factor of it. I mean, I have Adobe that I go back to that all the time. I have Denim that I go back to all the time. It's wonderful to be able to recreate the colors that I like and have a recipe for them. But yeah, I understand.
Maybe if I had an assistant.
I'll move back there. I'll help you.
All right, thank you. Then we have Eileen who asked, how do you keep your clay, how do you keep your flat pieces flat when curing the clay?
Oh, as I'm working, I'm guessing.
I think during the curing process, is it because
During the current process? Okay, so here's a piece that I've just started. And this will help visualize it. What I'm doing is a request by a gallery to do pieces similar to their faux cross stitch. So what I do is I plan this cross stitch piece out in Photoshop. And I don't know if you can see, but just the top, I put some cross stitching in. I just started this earlier today. So there's a little bit of faux cross stitch, they're clay, right? But this whole thing is on a piece of glass. There's the cross stitching you can see there. So the whole thing's on a piece of glass. Once this is Pyrex, it's what, about a 1/4 inch Pyrex. And once all the clay is on it, zip, it goes into the oven. And then once it's cured, it's hard, and I'll use the spatula, a regular old, well, it's a large spatula, then I'll take it off and then in this particular piece, it gets glued to linen, Japanese linen, to gives it more of a feel of a cross stitch, of a faux cross stitch. And that linen is initially, before the clay goes onto it, the linen is adhered to a gator board. And once that's adhered to the gator board, then the polymer clay rooster, in this case, gets adhered to the linen. And what I use for all this gluing is this is from the Liquid Fusion. It's heavy duty. It's by what's her name? Aleen's. Aleen's makes the glue. So that's what I use for adhering. And so far, one of them's lasted 10 years, so I guess it's okay.
My concern was when I bake something on a sheet of glass, it actually sometimes bubbles form underneath it. You don't have that problem.
No, plus all my pieces, the pieces that I use will be adhered to something. They're not, you know, that backside is forever hidden on a board or on cloth and glued. So if there are any bubbles, which I never had that problem with the 275 at 30 minutes, and that thin. Now, maybe if the pieces were thicker, you know what I mean? Maybe that might happen, but no, I've never had that problem.
Well, could that be because when you apply the clay to your final onto the glass, you're pressing it in and you're pressing and joining the pieces together. So if there is any air, it's not going to get it'll get pressed out.
It's minimum, absolutely, absolutely. And is it regular glass that you were doing it on, or is it?
Yes, it was
Regular
regular
glass.
glass. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
So-
it's more because you're doing it a little tiny bit at a time. When you lay a big sheet of clay down flat on the glass, it's really hard to avoid getting a little bit of air under there in places. But if you're doing it little tiny pieces at a time, you can make sure that that little tiny piece doesn't have any air underneath of it when you're placing it. So that makes sense to me.
Pyrex glass. Where do I get it? There's a local glass shop here in Lewis, Delaware, that will get it for me. But I've also sent away for it. And I don't know right now where I have that paperwork. It's someplace in the Midwest that I used to get it out of California, but that guy closed down. He was real good. The prices were terrific. But it's now someplace out of the Midwest. And they're really good in the fact that, and if you email me or contact me some way, I will look that up for you. And they're really good in the fact that they'll also sand down the edges so they're not sharp and you can handle it real easy. And that's important when your mind's going all different ways and you're not concentrating on picking something up.
Great, thank you. Karen asked, do you sand any of your pieces after baking?
No, not at all. I finished them with the acrylic, but I don't sand. They're too textured really to sand. I've contemplated it and maybe in the future for small pieces if I ever did that. But my future looks like larger and larger pieces because that's what the galleries want. Um, um, if going back to, so no, I don't sand the pieces. If how Denise, how are we going to give people my oh, I can type that into the
Type that into the chat.
chat. Yeah, I'll type my email address into the chat.
That would be great. Thank you.
Will the chat be saved, Denise?
Let's see. I believe it is. And I can, yes. Okay.
The chat should save with the recording
does.
if it's on the cloud. Yes.
But talking
Um,
about the textures,
We have other questions to go through, and then we're
I
gonna.
wanted to stay on that topic for a second. What I love about my Raven painting is the texture. And that's what amazes the people who see your work. Just thought I'd let you know.
Thank you, Lorraine. Yeah, that kind of texture using the extrusions, I'm going to call them extrusions because I can't think of a better word, but the cuts from these rollers can make it gives a nice flow, a nice energy to it.
Great, thank you. Paulette would like to know the spelling of the hand drill that you showed.
Oh, the name and the style.
Yeah.
What did I do with it? Oh, it's right here.
Found it actually and stuck it in the chat.
Oh, she did. Okay, I haven't gotten that far. All right, she found it.
Oh, you got it? Okay. Yeah. Inner twist. Inner twist is the kind.
And Linda would like to know if you could please share, if you could please say more about using the neon colors.
Oh yeah. I can't find them. If anybody knows where I can find some more. But what I do is if I'm making a red and I really want, particularly for this rooster here now, I really want that red to pop. I'll take some neon red and mix just a little bit in this so it looks too bright or yeah, too saturated for the image that I'm trying to make. But after it's cured, after it's baked, it's where I want it to be. Fingers crossed, you know, because I happen to be human and that hurts. So yeah, that's why I do it. And again, because I'm not that organized, I don't have formulas. It's a more trial and error type thing. And I will, if it initially when I try something new like that, I will use the toaster oven and bake test strips. But I don't say, oh, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Maybe I should do that, Denise. I should do that.
Oh, Laura found okay, so Shari said that cosplay makes neon colors, and Laura found a link to some neon. She put a link into something.
Oh, thank you.
That. A lot of the questions that were asked, you answered already. So at this point, if there are any questions left, I would ask you to raise your virtual hand. And I'll call on you and you can ask them. Okay. Michael sells fluorescent pink Primo. And
the pink still seems to be available, and I still have some up here. But I remember used to getting even blue, but the yellow and the green.
I have neon what's it called? Like powder that you put into it, that you put into your clay.
Oh.
And I got it from the guy who makes the the black paint that, you know, you have to swear that you're not going to give it to so and so because it's. Do you know the guy that I'm talking about? He makes like the 2.0, black 2.0 or whatever. Carol, go ahead. Let me unmute yourself, Carol.
Stuart Temple.
Yeah, Stuart Temple. He makes neon pigment powders.
Oh, good. I'll look that. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
What was
Right.
that again?
Stuart Temple.
I think it's Semple, S-E-M-P-L-E, Stuart
Sorry.
Semple.
Semple. Sorry, Semple. And Carol, did you have a question?
Yeah, one quick thought actually about the neon is sometimes you can find like packs of odd colors that we can't find otherwhere, like in kids, you know, like a kid's sampler might have some neon. So sometimes you can find it in weird places. My question was when you're displaying, because I'd love to see some more of these like in real life. I assume you don't put any glass in front of it.
I did initially only because I was concerned, or some people stated concerns about dust on them, but I don't anymore, and that's because the texture is really an important part of it. And I'm not really concerned. In fact, I'll go and I'll tap on my pieces on purpose to tell people, hey, this is vinyl. This stuff is hard. It's not going to go anywhere, you know? So no, I leave my pieces without glass now.
Do you have any real quick that you can just show in real life right now?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
I
you.
got one right here. Now this is an older work, and it's done with one of the spaghetti rollers. And it's a real simple work.
Yeah, and the color comes through too so much better without the glass, right? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, there's a dimension, a little bit of dimension on this. And this is also before I had the larger, let's see if I can turn down this light.
And what is that glued to? What is it on?
This is on a foam core board. This is before I switched over to Gator board. Gator board is much stiffer.
Okay.
And this is glued to foam core, and it does have a Gator board back to it. I added that afterwards. And this was done piecemeal, meaning I didn't have a large enough oven at the time
Right.
to put that in. But you can see if we can get some deep, there's this like feel of the texture.
Absolutely wouldn't want to cover that up with glass. Oh my God. No. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
And Miranda?
I was just going to add, I think Polymer Week has neon pigment powders as well.
Ah.
They did anyway, because I have some samples of it, but I don't know. I'm assuming they're still available.
All right. So Polymer Week may or may not have
the pigment powders and neon.
Powders and neon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where's Lucy when you need her?
Exactly.
Laura McGuinn says they do. Laura McGuinn says they do.
Oh, good.
All right.
Thank you. See, this is why I think this is why I really enjoy this group. The interchange of information is so important for everybody who's creating, and they're all good souls.
Fluorescent yellow we find at Blueberry Beans. Okay, so we've got some fluorescent out there that we can find. Great. Okay, so I am going to add Corliss back in. There we go.
Joseph, thank you so much. That was great. And It thrills me to pieces when speakers come and they hold their audience. I mean, everybody is still here. They're very rapt with what you're doing, and it was such a pleasure to have you today.
Again,
Really, really wonderful.
it's a testament, really. It's not me as much as it's a testament to the organization and how everybody helps everybody else out.
Yep. All righty. Thank you again. Enjoyed you to pieces.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you everybody for being here.
Take care.
Alrighty.
Thank you. Awesome presentation.